Right. It's Tuesday again. Obviously, we don't have Tad today, and we don't have Chad. We've got myself, obviously, Brandon Hudson, and special guest today. I think Tad has an eye appointment, but so we're taking advantage of that to get the one and only, the incomparable Dr. Ben Higgins.
Jeez.
Chief research scientist, both for KISS and for Gold Leaf Gardens. And we wanted to take advantage of this and get Ben in here. We'll be fielding some
Yeah.
questions like we normally do and that kind of stuff. But, Ben's going to be humble about this. But do you want to give us a little bit of your biography for folks that might not know?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I'm usually the guy like either behind the camera, behind the podcast, behind so this is like, I'm trying to get better at being out there and being a little bit more FaceTimey, but I really appreciate just, being able to rap with such knowledgeable folks. Yeah, so my background is pretty funny actually. I only started playing around in the cannabis space in 2018 actually, and with no previous plans, not even really a desire necessarily to do so. It just kind of turned into this big black hole that just kind of slowly got bigger and bigger and bigger. And all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life have fallen into it. Accountants, doctors, lawyers, of course, and then a bunch of scientists. And I found myself trying to figure out what to do. My background is luckily in ecology and evolutionary biology. So all of not all, but most of how I view cannabis, the world, is from it's a very systems kind of how does this impact this kind of stuff. So 2018, I started working at Gold Leaf Gardens, my brother-in-law's farm. I came up and said, hey, I'm looking for a gig at Department of Fish and Wildlife because that's kind of what my background was in. And after that, uh, I couldn't get a gig and I was just working at the farm and I just kind of slowly looked around and I was like, hey, wait a minute. Like, there's a lot of really important, cool work that can be
Cannabis,
done here.
cannabis could use some science.
You know what I mean? And that was it was a little bit of a delicacy, right? Because here I am coming in like fresh off a PhD, you know, what's going on? I don't know anything about any of this. And then I didn't want to come in and be like, oh, you're doing this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and this wrong, because I didn't know any of this. What's going on, everybody? Sorry, I want to make sure I keep an eye on the chat. I know this was got to lock in here. Important.
No, talk
Afternoon,
away.
evening, morning, wherever you guys are coming in. Thanks for joining. Um, yeah, so I came into the farm knowing ecology and evolutionary biology, but my study system was a kelp forest off of Southern California. So I had to take the principles of that ecosystem and kind of broadly apply it initially to cannabis. But the most important thing any scientist can do, everyone talks about the scientific method, right? We love to harp on it too at KISS, scientific method. And a lot of people thinks it starts with the hypothesis, right? Like I want to make a hypothesis and then do an experiment, collect this data, make some conclusions, and then go from there. The first part of that, though, isn't actually building the hypothesis. It's being able to make an observation that can then lead you to the hypothesis. So I spent a year at Gold Leaf observing. I had to learn my system. It was like the first time I went diving in a kelp forest, I was like, well, for one, this is pretty fucking cool. But for two, I was like, how am I supposed to know what questions to ask? I just got here. And so what I wanted to make sure um, when I got into the cannabis space and in the farm, I wanted to make sure that I had enough time to uh, learn the system. I wanted to make sure that everybody who had done the work, the Brandons of the industry, right? The people who have grown, lived, breathed, all of this, I want to learn from you. And before I just keep going, the last thing I want to say is when I was doing my PhD, I obviously had to read more than I've ever read in my life. I had to read textbooks, I had to read articles, I had to read da 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 da. But some of the most knowledgeable and applicable information I learned came from fishermen, right? The people who were out there day in and day out actually
Doing
living this work, right? Not just, researching it. All of this has to work together, right? But like the people who literally are their hands are in the dirt. These guys had their hand on the fishing line, and I asked them questions, and I had some of the most amazing insights from people who likely didn't do a whole lot of academic work themselves, but just the sheer knowledge of being in the field lets you know which questions to ask. So for a year, I did that, and then I slowly started to get enough confidence in our system, into our grow methods. And then I was able to link, trophic food webs just instead of marine. I went to soil. And then so all these different concepts, I was able to over time just kind of reshape and reform to be able to have enough of a confident understanding to start asking some really fun questions and a look and giving Brandon, just as you said, an empirical lens to all of this kind of grow stuff, experience that people have had. So
No, I love that, man, because this is off topic, but you know me, I'm off topic all the time. I saw a really interesting thing the other day, and they were a YouTube video where they were studying indigenous people up around the Arctic Circle, close to that, and some of the observations that these folks were able to make about their environment defied anything that the scientists could figure out. And so I love, because cannabis, in certain areas of cultivation, especially like watering, um,
yeah,
really see where the art and the science have got to get together. And
yeah,
so I love working with experiential growers. One of my, I'm going to go ahead and she'll get mad at me, but I'm going to plug Justin McGill's head grower,
yeah.
Allison Schaefer Joy. Allison is an experiential grower,
Hmm.
and I think that some of the conversations that she and I've had, she'll express, a feeling that I hear from a lot of growers where they feel inadequate because unlike you or me, where we're just rifling off all these acronyms and blah 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 blah.
Right, right.
Taken me 40 years to get there. It's taken you a doctorate to get there and a bunch of experience. And so don't knock that experience that you've
No,
got, because I'd put Allison up against just about anybody with
that's
whatever
right.
whatever data set, because she just lives and breathes and she can read those plants, the same way you and I
Yep.
can walk into a room and be like, potassium,
Whoops.
calcium, magnesium, phosphorus. I got in trouble one time, or a few times with
Yeah.
girls when I was younger, because I'm diagnosing their parents' plants at dinner, and they're kicking me under the table like, "You're a tattoo guy. You're not supposed to know this." Like don't.
Right, right.
Uh,
Yeah, it's one of those things too where like you just being open and appreciative of whatever anybody can bring to the table,
yeah,
regard because that the real magic happens when you can take anybody's experience, viewpoint, um, data, and just start to mull that around cohesively and coherently, especially in a facility, because you're going to have so many different viewpoints off the same thing. Like
yeah,
it's just going to be, how do we handle this problem? Well, let's look at the data. Well, I've had experience doing that. If all of those things can come to the table, it's going to be it's never going to be perfect. And I think that's important to recognize too, but it's going to be the best informed decision. And if you can say, we are going to be making the best informed decision, you've done your job. And then if
yeah.
something goes sideways,
And it will, because
welcome
it's
to,
cultivation.
yeah,
It's plants
right.
and people. There's going to be an issue.
But then you could be like, well, this is what we did, blah, 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 blah. What if we reinvestigate this one or this one? Or did we do this one? Like, so that's the thing about just adding a little bit more of a structure to all of this amazing experience and knowledge that all of these growers have has been really exciting. So
The thing that
you-
I appreciate that I've personally, as a peer and a friend, that I've gotten from you, that I repeat on a daily basis to growers, because I'm kind of the answer guy at KISS. I got a problem
mm,
with talk to Brandon, and
hmm
what I really try to hammer home is something that you've hammered home in me is covariance, cofactors.
yeah,
Yes, we're looking at a XYZ, we're looking at a
right,
phosphorus in this plant. But is it the temperature? Is it the fertility? Is it the
yeah,
biology? There's none of these are open systems. There's, you'll never,
moving parts everywhere.
and so to speak to what you were just talking about, soil testing and like metrics, PAR, VPD,
Yep.
just all these metrics that we have, those are guardrails. And the plant does great in
Yeah.
air. Just don't get outside the guardrails. And
Yeah.
so that enables us to stay consistent and to move forward. And like you mentioned, there will be problems. There will be an IPM problem. Something will get in your building. Something you'll have a flood. And you'll have a lot
Yep.
of death, and then those plants are just not gonna. Tad's joining us. Awesome.
Hey, Tad.
Uh, Tad's in the building. So, but yeah, so let's rather than us hanging out and just having a two-way conversation,
Yeah.
let's get to some folks' questions.
Yeah. I got this first one here. Repotting. Thanks for sending this in. Do you report from clone seed pot to 1 gallon permanent home, from clone seed pot to permanent home? If so, have you noticed a difference in growth in living soil? Great question. We typically will go straight into a 1 gallon in our facility. And then in that 1 gallon, it'll live there for about 2 weeks. And then it'll get transferred out of that 1 gallon plastic pot. That can go transplant straight into the bed. I'm of the mind that, I mean, I think everybody here can probably agree that moving sucks. And plants are kind of the same. They're resilient, of course, but the fewer touches, the less, another term that we like to throw around is muda, the less labor that you have to take your time out to do this task. That time doesn't go away. It just can be done doing other things, right? So you can start to think of your time as more of a currency if you plan ahead and think like, well, if I just put this in 1 gallon and that 1 gallon, and again, covariates abound, right? Cultivar specific, whether or not you um, the 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 cultivars you have can live in a 1 gallon if they're really avid grower, whatever. Let's say you can, the fewer the touches, the better. Those roots get sensitive, and yeah, I think every time, and I don't want to speak for you, Brandon, but every time I've spoken to a customer through KISS, I've always tried to decrease the amount of moving from this to this to this to this to this.
Yep, 100%. The folks that know my personal story, I spent years, and I'm talking, 10, 12 months, no days off, 12, 16-hour days. My short days were 10-hour days. I felt like I had a day off. And so every single thing I do, my number one focus, once I get within the targets, once I get within the guardrails, is I'm thinking about touches and reducing labor. Anything I can possibly do to streamline.
Yeah,
Like, yes, would it be better to spoon feed plants fertility every day? The plant would probably like that better. Do I
yeah,
want to spend the labor on that? Can I get a fairly similar harvest by doing the bulk as a one-time pre-plant application? Let's do it. And I'm all about
right,
that. So
right.
I love it. The fewer touches, the better. I don't like to take the only caveat, or I guess like to wrap that one up, is I don't like to take a clone and go into its forever home, like into a
Yeah,
big bed.
yeah,
I have done it. I do it sometimes, if my production schedule
yeah,
gets up, or I just don't have enough room for my plants where I've got them, and I'll move them out. But the plants really will perform better if you allow them to kind of get close, not root bound, but close to root bound in that one
Yeah,
gallon. And I know some folks that like to go to a 4 inch and then a 1 gallon. If I had some prized seed that I really wanted to milk it along and just make
right.
sure it was super happy, I might do that. But I have to say what Ben said, keeping that labor down is I'm all about it. So yeah, go into that.
Yeah, and the thing too, guys, what you have to, we're trying to answer some of these questions. Maybe, you're like Brandon was kind of alluding to. You're gonna probably get a different answer if we're talking about somebody with a 4x4 or a 3x3 or a handful of pots at home versus somebody who's got to like
Yeah.
look at a room and sees 1,200 plants in there. Then reality is gonna have to kind of set in at some point and be like, yeah, can I, should I, maybe, but can I don't know. So that's when it's really kind of looking at your time and labor as a currency and being like, do I want to spend it on this? What's my ROI going to be back from taking that much time to microdose every single plant? Am I really going to see that? And you can collect the data on it. And sure enough, if you find that it's worth it, there's your answer, right?
And that's
None of
why
this stuff has to
that.
be done.
You track that.
Exactly.
That's another
Exactly.
thing I got from you, a statistically relevant bump. And if you don't
Yep.
have a statistically relevant bump, why do it?
Yeah.
I like Tad's point here. Transplanting allows for, we're trying to save money on everything, not just labor, but electric too.
Right.
So you can get, by putting plants into, small pots, you can pack a bunch of them under, one light, as opposed to if they're in 20 gallons, you're going to have to turn the whole room on to light all those plants. So that's a great point as well.
All right. Another question we got here. You guys think resonant frequency can be used to kill viruses and plants as well as pest control and extraction? Resonate frequency.
Yeah, no, I've seen some stuff about this, but right now, and this is another, I love this. This is another thing I got from Ben. I'm just going to use all of Ben's good stuff today. And won't let him- but I, there's a lot of different topics that are out there that people are interested in, but at this time, there's no data that would substantiate that claim that a resonant frequency could be used to kill viroids, viruses, or pests. There is some really interesting data that's starting to come out about the UV and that kind of stuff, where that was kind of more conjecture a couple years ago. Like we've got
Mm.
some really interesting data on that. So that's something I'd be more interested in. But at this time, yeah, no.
Yeah, I
And
haven't.
there could always be data next month that says, yeah. So that's why we're not dogmatic at KISS. If you're dogmatic, you can't learn. So we're open to being
Yeah.
wrong. We're open to learning, but right now the data says no.
And like that's just the other fun thing about science that everyone should keep in mind too, right? That what we say is right or wrong is only based on the data that we've been presented with. It's the only, you know what I mean? So right now anybody could pick up a pair of car keys and drop them and they don't go anywhere, right? Like theoretically that could happen. They just hover there in the air. They don't fall to the ground. But so all that we're saying is based on the information that we've seen, the conversations we've had, the experiences in our past. Um, this is our best estimation of what's
And
likely
we
going to help or not.
and we take it to heart. We do our due
Yeah.
diligence. We do take the responsibility of advising cultivation, because if you're a 4x4 grower at home, it's not going to destroy your budget if your plants go down. It's gonna break your
Yeah.
heart. I've been growing this plant for 40 years. I don't want to see that happen. Um, you know,
Yeah.
so we gather as much data as we possibly can, and we
And
try to speak to the damage.
I will be the first one to say, I have no idea. I just don't know. And so what I can do is try to find out and help, or we can look for someone like a Dr. Greenhouse, for example, or a Suzanne, or somebody who is a more of an expert in the field. We can. It's one of my
And
favorite things about KISS too. Nobody's got the like I know everything. We're not supposed to. So we reach out to our friends.
And when we talk about these things like resonant frequency or whatever, is there something that's more effective? Is there something that is, more cost effective, labor effective?
Mhm.
Does it control the virus or the pest better? So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for best practices. And so
Mhm.
I'll entertain anything. It's all interesting to me, but as far as giving advice to cultivators, we have a moral responsibility to really stand
Yeah.
on. Thanks, KJ.
Yeah. All
Um,
right.
yeah.
For those wanting to get away from fat guano as a soil amendment, he's. I'm gonna let you take this one, Brandon. What's a viable option?
Okay, so guanos. I absolutely love guanos. They're phenomenal. And as far as getting almost immediately available pee in an organic system, aside from, like a fish hydrolysate that's been stabilized with phosphoric acid, it's phenomenal. There's a lot of problems. I haven't used guanos in years. I mean,
Hmm.
at least 5, probably 8, 10 years I haven't been using guanos. Obviously guanos, harvesting of guanos, these are really fragile, really important ecosystems. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to challenge anybody, but go wipe out your local bat population, and I dare you to go outside in the summertime, because your mosquito population is going to be exponentially worse. So we need these fragile ecosystems to maintain, and harvesting from them is just not really sustainable.
Yeah.
There's also a very real concern for human health, as well as
Yeah.
bats. There's, I think it's white nose fungus. It's a bat fungus that can,
Yeah.
even treated guanos, can
It'll
transfer over.
wipe out a colony.
Yeah, and if you wanted to start a next pandemic, go to a wet market, grab a bat, and see what happens. Eat some
Yeah.
undercooked bat tonight and see what happens. So they're well documented for having viruses and that kind of stuff that can jump over to humans. So
I think there were a couple of growers who I think just died. I think it was a
somebody just
month or
died
two ago, right? Yeah, because
recently.
of bat guano.
So
I
I
mean, and
would.
that's the thing too. Yeah, like the ROI on any input is never worth killing the grower.
Never.
So,
Yeah, that's not efficient. That's not
you know what I
efficient.
mean? And I'll have this happen too, where it's like, if I'm talking about a blue mat system and someone's wanting to do gravity, and they're like, "Oh, I have this, 400-gallon reservoir I was gonna put on some 2x4s." I'm like, please don't. Like, I don't want like I really want you guys to see the end of your run. You know what I mean? Like, we want all these products and all these methods to be safe first and foremost, and then after that
Yeah,
we
but
can
so
get
to
going.
answer the actual question, what can you use
Yeah.
instead? So we already mentioned phosphoric acid. So if you've got high pH water, you can use phosphoric acid to reduce your pH, and that's just a free available um, phosphorus source. You can use fish hydrolysates. I'm a big fan of Pacific Grow's CFOS. It's just got a higher phosphorus metric, and a little bit lower nitrogen, because I'm usually on point with my nitrogen. And so if I have a phosphorus issue, I'll go for that. I like to make sure that I am using some sort of phosphorus specific solubilizing bacteria, like microbial mass. I think that's important. Um, but I bring in a lot of bone meal, and I use some soft rock phosphate. Phosphorus is the hardest one to manage in organics for a couple of
Hmm.
reasons. It's gonna, mined products are all gonna have some sort of heavy metal content. Um, Bone can have issues, but it's this big word problem when I'm doing a soil report. And so that bone is bringing in nitrogen and calcium and other things. And so I have to factor for all that. So it can't always work. If you've got too much
Right.
nitrogen already, you can't use that as a bone meal as a source. If you try to go all soft rock, you'll definitely fail for heavy metals. At home, it doesn't really matter. It's still going to be safe. But facility, you couldn't do that. But at home, the problem with soft rock, trying to get all your phosphorus there, is that it's not gonna ever be. You're never gonna hit your available metric with just soft rock.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one to do. It's a difficult one for, on the random occasion that somebody wants a veganic mix. That's the one where sometimes I'll recommend using a specific single ionic source for phosphorus. And so, no, they're not an organic grow, but they still get the benefits, all these, biological interactions with the plant. So your terpenes and your trichomes will be on point, and you're not going to wipe out your biology with a single phosphorus input. And we want to be judicious with that anyway, because we want to be good stewards with the planet, and we don't want to over apply and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So I think I answered that question. I did see some follow-ups. I would toss that bat guano that you've got that's 20 years old.
Yeah.
Seabird guano is the same. It's most of they're not going to your local fishing pier and harvesting it. They're going on to some fragile cliff side, and again, there could be, other bad stuff that comes along with the, birds getting,
Yeah.
like, I think we all know as kids not to touch bird poop. It could have all kinds of horrible stuff
Yeah.
in it.
Right now, too, there's not a whole lot of stuff. The bird population's having a rough go of it as
Yeah.
it is, and
Avian
especially
flu.
seabirds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
flew on the
Yeah.
west coast. Scary. So yeah.
Um, all right, another question I'll throw up here. What do you think about crushed sprouts in water to give specific hormones for indicas to get higher and other ones for sativas to keep them lower? Um,
To keep hormone levels higher and lower, I don't think that we have that much control kind of in the same way. Like, I like to play with, you know, brassinotoids, ethylcytokinins. Like, there's like 8 basic hormone
yeah.
paths. I kind of look at it like teas. Like, I can play with a tea and try to move it
Hmm.
bacterial or more fungal, but once it hits the soil, it's kind of going to go back to whatever homeostasis that nature wants, at
Right.
18 carbon to nitrogen ratio, bacterial to fungal ratios. So they're kind of, temperature, humidity,
Yep.
irrigation, all that kind of stuff. So I don't think we have that level of control yet. I do think that we should be targeting certain hormones. Like, you want to make sure that, um, like ethylene, that's good. That helps us ripen
Yeah.
up, you know,
Ripen. Hmm.
like, that's, I hate chop and drop because of the pest and pathogen issues. I know some people on here love it, so I'm not judging it. It just scares me as a person. It's more work for me if something goes sideways. Um, but it does put off ethylene. Those rotting leaves puts off a lot of ethylene, so that'll help you finish faster and more uniformly. So,
Yeah.
I do think that it's a good idea. But, like, I used to do like the sprouted seed teas and stuff like that. Goes back to that statistically relevant bump. I never saw an
Yeah.
improvement. The plant's got everything it needs. So I would maybe use something, like a sprouted seed tea if I had like old genetics that I was trying to pop just to give it a little extra help,
Hmm.
something like that. But I do think it's worth playing with different hormones. Um, just follow a scientific method, have a control, do one plant at a
Yep.
time, see what kind of effect you can have. Like, I've Tad and I talked about tricontinol in the last one of these that we did, and a lot of folks use alfalfa hoping that they get tricontinol, but the tricontinol that comes out of alfalfa is really not stable and not really usable by the plant. Our plant, it was used by that alfalfa, but not available to our plant. And so, like, I had a friend from Canada. She sent me some a tricontinol, a chemical version, a
Hmm.
synthetic version. So it was stable, and it was, I was able to use it. I got some weird growth patterns and some stuff like that to where I just kind of back
Yeah.
of it. And so I don't play with that a whole lot. I think it's a really cool area of study. I just, back to the tea analogy, I don't feel like we have enough control.
Yeah. And for me too, it's one of those things where, again, if you've got a really small little grow that you're, hobby or, medical or whatever, you have that kind of time and dedication. available to you to play with that kind of stuff. The thing too for a lot of especially facilities and stuff is unless they have an R&D room, which believe it or not is
Most don't.
shockingly few. There are
No
shockingly few
quarantine. Yeah,
facilities.
no quarantine rooms and no R&D rooms. So if you're setting up a facility,
Yeah,
have those.
yeah. And so that way you can answer questions like this because even at my facility, I have to be pretty careful because there are certain things that I would love to answer, certain questions, but the answer would mean that I would know that I would be purposefully tanking certain plants
Yeah.
to prove a point. And obviously, if those are production plants, that's a no-go. So when you start getting into things like hormones, like Brand was saying, you might get in some, weird growth patterns and stuff like that. Maybe you get more out of that, but it's going to have to really, cross the Rubicon, so to speak, as far as making it worth it. And hormones are dicey because different cultivars can up and down regulate given the same menu, and it can get dicey. I think there's plenty of levers to pull before you
Without,
start getting into the
yeah.
hormone stuff.
Yeah. When we start talking about ranking limiting factors, that would be
Yeah.
low on my list of things I would approach. But I do think it's really interesting. The last thing I would say on that question is that there's been a big swing in the last probably 4 or 5 years with the terms indica and sativa, and where those are still
Hmm.
really useful to describe a particular experience you might have. Um, Now that we're understanding these plants, we're coming out of prohibition, we're able to study them better and that sort of thing. Something that might genetically look like a sativa or an indica um, may have a totally opposite effect of
Yeah.
what we expect. We expect a clear-headed, up high, more psychedelic, laughy, whatever sativa. Indica's couch lock, sleepy, hungry, that kind of stuff. And so those conversations, like we're trying to find better terminology,
Yeah.
uh, but we these terms are kind of entrenched in our community, and so we're trying to navigate that better. So
Right. And it's like the same as like strain cultivar. Like there's all these different, and that's just the lingo will change over time.
yeah, and just to defend the scientists, because I do see people get beat up about that sometimes. Like nobody likes when you correct their spelling or their pronunciation. So if somebody says strain, don't jump on them and say cultivar.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
the reason somebody might put that out there, hopefully their intention is that um, verbiage counts in science because it can really delineate between some really tight metrics or delineators of something. So
Yeah.
long plant versus low plant. Oh, okay. So you're talking about hormones to control height. So yeah, and so that goes back to what Ben just said. Um, Hormones can definitely impact height, but I would be focused on light and temp differential would be the things I would primarily um, pay attention to there. It looks like I just lost Ben here, so I'll just keep going until he comes back in. Um, how to do a seed increase with 1 pack of seeds from ZZ Trop. Um, so I think what you're asking is how to have a bunch of seeds from that one pack. And so obviously, the easiest thing to do would just, select a male that you like, select a female that you like, and let them get together, make a bunch of seeds for you. Uh, let's see. Um, okay, it looks like we've lost Ben here in the chat. I'm going to try to get back down here and see some other questions. The live enzymes would be available to the plants. Um, yeah, I mean, gaseous hormones, enzymes like ethylene and that kind of stuff. We know that works. I think that somebody asked about banana peels, and yeah, you could definitely do banana peels or something like that in your in your beds. Let me see if I can get Ben back on here. But you could do something like that. I don't, it could be a fun little experiment. I don't think that you'll see a huge difference in anything. But, if you've got a plant that is stubborn or, something you want to try to speed up, that would definitely be worth, um, an experiment. Little Nugs came in here with a great comment. Reversing the nighttime and daytime temps can affect plant size as well. So yeah, just playing with that night and day differential um, can do a lot, and light spectrum will do a lot as well. Um, okay, Benda said he is coming back. I apologize because I can't see the chat too well. Um, all right. Damien's got a great question. How do you pop older seeds that may not have been stored properly for long-term storage, 10 years plus beans? Welcome back, Dr.
Hey
Ben.
guys.
Uh, so Damien, I'm just getting to Damien's question. There might be some questions that I can't go through the
Yeah,
chat.
I'm good
So,
with it. I got them.
but Damien asked, how do you pop older seeds? And so they've been sitting around for 10 years, not in proper
Oh,
storage. One trick that has worked for me over the years with, like I've got a pack of Karma's sour diesel back cross. Every single one of those seeds is very precious to me. And so I pop them one at a time. But if I'm going to pop old seeds that I've had for a long time, I'll put them in the refrigerator. If they haven't been properly stored, I'll put them in a refrigerator for a couple of days and this is something that I just learned from growing up on a farm, like giving a cold treatment to a seed in order to get it to trick it into thinking that it's time to germinate. So now you pull it out of the fridge, it warms up, the seed thinks it's spring. So you could get different hormone levels and that kind of stuff, and so you have a better chance. um, I like to soak seeds. If it's an older seed, I'll soak it in a cup with peroxide. That way I can make sure that anything that grew on the shell of that seed's not going to work against me. So if there's mold or anything on that seed, on the shell, it's not going to get me. And then I'll usually, again, if these are important, old genetics, I'm really trying to massage them and be gentle with them. After I soak it in a cup for 48 hours with peroxide, I might go into a paper towel, something like that. Um, let's see. You really pop one at a time. Yeah, only for certain genetics. It's something that if it's something really really important to me, and I've only got a few of them. Like I've got less than a dozen of those Karma sour diesels. So if I pop those, I want to make sure that But normally, I throw handfuls in, because I like to I like to hunt.
some questions that I had earlier that I had the queue, but then my computer decided to take a nap on me. So, all right. When spraying with Pavera, can I include a tablespoon of magnesium as kind of dual action?
So I would, I mean, so the best answer here is to go
Hmm.
on BioWorks
Check
website.
out.
BioWorks has the hands down the best tank compatibility uh, pages of any company I've ever
Yeah.
looked through. And so you could go on their page and look up Bavaria, and then you could literally type in a little search box any product you can think of, Epsom salts for magnesium, but you could put in different horticultural oils, and it'll pop out what you can work it with, if there's a change to the application rate and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Me personally, my gut instinct is, we know that salts don't kill all the biology. Bovaria is expensive. A product like Botanigard WP is expensive, so you want to max it out. Microbial mass is expensive. You want to max it out. You don't want them to become food sources for other biology. So I tend to run my biology by itself and without any other salts or anything in it, just for you know
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
best.
That's a really good point, Brandon. And two, just from a safety thing, anytime you're going to start to be like, can I add this to this to this to that? Um, Especially if we're talking IPM stuff, all of those things usually have what's called a material safety data sheet or an MSDS,
Yep.
and you'll want to find that. They're usually available, readily available. I think legally they might have to be available through the manufacturer, and that'll tell you some information too, as far as like, what it can play nice with, what it can't play nice with, because the last thing you want to do is turn into a chemist without realizing it. That's always a bad time.
Yeah, yeah. I reached out to doctors Chris Hayes and Dr. Michael Brownbridge a bunch about different Bioworks products.
Hmm.
And at one point, Chris very patiently was like, "Hey, we have a whole website."
Right.
So, there's a lot of stuff in there.
Awesome. And I've
Yeah, there's
got,
a lot of great comments over here. Folks talking about heat
yeah,
seeds, folks talking about the
good
peroxide.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Is there an advantage using compost over worm castings or vice versa?
that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I don't know.
You want me to jump on that one?
I'll
Um,
jump in with you. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So normally, I always, any compost questions, that's a Hussey question usually, because like, his family.
Yeah.
I think Leon Hussey. I think compost. So. Yes, there's a difference between using compost versus worm castings and vice versa. All compost is really you've got in a living soil, you've got some sort of aeration fraction. We like pumice. You've got your cocoa peat fraction, and then you've got your compost fraction that could be made up of manure compost, fish compost, municipal, all these different sources. Worm castings is one of them, vermicompost. Vermicompost tends to be more uniform,
Hmm.
uh, tends to have more fertility, can also have higher sodium and chlorides, though. And so the real answer to this is you want to get a good test of your
Yeah.
compost, your worm compost, whatever it is. You want to get a good test, and you're looking for pH. You just don't want something in a crazy range, like 5.8 to 7.3 would be fine for me. Carbon to nitrogen ratio is probably the most important thing I'm looking for there. If
Mm.
it's above 18 to 1, that's a pass. I keep moving because it's going to tie up all the nitrogen in your soil. And then finally, I'll look at the fertility and sodium and chlorides, bad actors first, and then fertility. Because for me, compost, I know there's certain folks like Jim, like Clackamas Coot, like
Yeah.
he feeds his worms fertility so that he doesn't have to add fertility. So he's using a different process than what we do. Um,
Middleman.
I'm really leaning on compost for the biology, and in that case, I would go with the worm castings because when you get worm castings, you're going to get cocoons, you're going to get worms, and the biology that comes out of a worm's gut is just absolutely magic. It's one of the coolest things in our soil, and so I'm a
Yeah.
big fan.
Yep. The other fun thing too is when you do have worms cruising around, you know that you have a healthy ecosystem
Yeah,
because those are the apex predators, right? And without those, none of that, you're not getting those unless all the stuff underneath it exists and is healthy and there's enough of them. So you can use certain species, they call them indicator species, to just give you a sense of how healthy the ecosystem is as a whole. And just whether or not they're there sometimes is enough to do that.
yeah, yeah. I call them the canaries in the coal mine because if you
Yep.
weren't, I poke my finger in the soil every time I go in my room, and it
Yep.
usually just bubbles up with worms and rove beetles and hypoapsis miles, or
Yep.
strats, stratiolalips. They got a name change. The artist formerly known as Prince, but
Yeah, they move around.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Cool. Um, this is a fun one. Talking about ethylene. Bag of banana peel sufficient to introduce ethylene to a 10 by 10 room for ripening.
yeah. We talked
Um,
about that one while you were gone.
you did. Okay, good. I was just gonna say that sounds like a fun experiment. Put one
Yeah,
banana peel, put
yeah,
two, put three, and then see what works.
yeah. I don't
Great.
think you're gonna get a big bump on that one, but it's a fun experiment if you've got a
Yeah,
finicky, or especially if you're in a small tent or something.
yeah, perfect. Brandon, this one's probably more in your wheelhouse too. What do you think about regular seeds made with feminized females?
I don't have any problem with them. It's a crucial tool for us to, I am constantly lamenting, I'm a second generation grower. My dad, my uncle grew. I grew up in a house where cannabis was not a weird thing. We knew we weren't supposed to talk to the police about it, but I'm always lamenting the seeds that got thrown out, like the seeds from the 60s and early 70s that my dad and my uncle had. Man, there's not much I wouldn't do to get those back. And then we just threw them all out. Um, and so these days, being able to make, feminized seed, I know that a lot of folks worry about herms and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Uh, I A lot of hermaphroditic traits are latent, and so
Yeah, right.
you're if you're cooking along and your room is dialed and your fertility's there and your irrigation's right, I've had strains. Yeah, I just did it. I've had cultivars for. I have one cultivar I've been running for about 6 years. It's Stay Puffed from Compound, and I love it. I'm a
Mm,
huge fan of it. I've kept it around for a number of years now, and I've never, ever, ever, ever seen it harm. And I don't think knock on rocks, I don't think I ever will. I gave it to a
yeah,
friend of mine who has a pretty huge facility, and he called and said, "Hey, you sent me a herm," and I said,
yeah.
What are you doing wrong?" And it was a lively debate, but so I think that. I don't worry too much about that. I don't think that there's any problem with that.
So Brandon,
So
real
that's
quick,
the
you
way.
just you touched on something that got me excited, which is this idea that what worked for you and what you've seen for years, the second you put it somewhere else, it did something totally different, right? And so I think that's important for a lot of folks to pick up on too, which is what works in your tent, in your garage, in your third bedroom, in your attic, in your facility is going to be unique to that location. So what I mean by that is, I mean, it's almost the easiest way to think about it is just like home field advantage, right? Like why is home field advantage a big deal in sports? Well, because it gives the team playing at home a competitive advantage, right? So the environment in which these interactions, the biology, the plants, the microbes, you yourself, the grower, you are a genome in that room, just like the rest of them. Um, the way those things all interact depends on the stage that they're interacting on, right? And so when we talk about, like Brandon said, this has been working great for me. Just because it works great for somebody doesn't mean you should take it, their word, writ large, and apply it to your whole garden. Again, the importance of taking a small little piece of your garden, if you can, to devote to research, development, fact checking, just confirming things before you send it out into your entire canopy is so it's almost invaluable because it could either make or break an entire facility. So
100%. You got to know
keep that in mind.
what works in the lab, may not work in a real life situation. If you put, for just an example, like put a specific mite in a petri dish and put it in there with an aphid. If there's nothing else on the planet to eat, it might eat that aphid. And so
Right.
now Secretary is selling that as a control. I see this all the time for like russets and broads. Oh, use this, this, and this. Well, in real life, as growers, we know that's not particularly effective. So usually when I give talks, I talk about this TED talk I saw one time, and it's a little long story, so I'll just keep it really short. Essentially, you need to do the research yourself. You need to check in
Yeah.
your facility because
Yeah.
like even if it's all the identical, me, Tad, and Ben, we could have the exact same
Yeah.
square footage at home, be growing
Totally
same
different.
cultivars, everything, and we're going to have slightly different environments. Tad and I talk regularly about the differences between our temperature and relative humidity, and we're both a little restricted on electricity, and so we have some battles. We can't plug in
Yeah.
all the stuff that we're used to using, and so yeah.
Great. Let me try to get through some of these awesome questions we got here. We got about 10 minutes left. How do you
And
do
we
seed increase?
we
You
talked
covered
about
this
that
one?
a little bit, and I
Great.
just pop some beans and cross them, and it's amazing the number. I mean, I always try to, like, I'll go in, I try to get a couple of beans every round just to
Great.
see. So I go in with a watercolor brush and paint it on and, turn all the fans off, and I'll come back
Cool.
in, wet everything the next day to kind of deactivate that. And I'll still get enough seeds off of that one little touch, to start a seed company. It's insane. So
Cool, man. That's one part I've not gotten into yet. The whole seed breeding thing. It sounds
I
fascinating though.
love it. It's so fun.
All right, Brandon, what's your opinion on seedling exposure to soluble P during early mycorrhizae colonization? I understand P can disassociate mycorrhizae and cause soluble P addiction.
Yeah, so that's a great question. What we've seen, and I wish Tad was here because I think that he's the one that looked at the data on this one. I mean, I know he's here, but he's not talking. But we have seen data that shows that um, if you've got available P, your plants may not form a relationship with the mycorrhiza because they don't need it. Um, so that could be a problem. When you say soluble P addiction, I think that all cannabis plants have an available phosphorus addiction, and like we talked a little bit earlier, phosphorus really is the hardest one to manage. It's got triple
Yeah.
bonds that take a ton of energy to separate, and so our plants don't have the exudates to do that, and we have to rely on specialized bacteria to do that. Unless we're cheating with phosphoric acid, fish
Right.
hydrolysis, guanos, things like that. But so my the thing I'm most interested right now about with mycorrhiza is that we have, unfortunately, like, everybody loves mycorrhiza. I love mycorrhiza, but we have seen, it's been demonstrated, the data shows that mycorrhiza will help improve heavy metal uptake along with everything else. So if
Yeah.
you're in a facility in a tight state, you might want to not use mycorrhiza. Um, but yeah, so I think that avoiding uh, soluble P, available P, a liquid source during early mycorrhiza colonization is a good step. Those roots colonize pretty quickly, though. I think the best way to do it is, you can dust seeds with mycorrhiza as soon as, I mean, you could have a little teeny tiny um, root, and you can dust that. I usually wait, like with production, I'll take a tray or a paper plate or something, shake out some mycorrhiza on it, and then I just grab my clones and I just set them on the tray. And just by setting them on, my roots on that, it's in contact, and
Yeah.
so you could hold off a week. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
Great.
Oh, here Tad came in and answered it. Yeah. So yeah,
Perfect.
it does show that high available P reduces mycorrhizal infection. So yeah. There we go.
Do worms really help removing pathogens from soil? What about mustard as a cover crop? All right. Two things, I guess, on this one. Worms with removing pathogens from soil. Um, Depends on the pathogen, obviously, but like I was kind of mentioning earlier, the real defense against pathogens in your soil is already other things that are occupying those niches. And what I mean by that is everybody remembers the like kids toy, right? Where you have the circle, then the square, then the star, then the triangle, and you got to put the little things in. If you think about those as like roles in an ecosystem, our living soils have all of those things. There's a square for the square, there's a that it's triangle for the triangle, star for the star. We have organisms already fulfilling those roles. So that means that the next time a pathogen tries to invade the soil, they look around, they've got all these other things that are either A, going to compete for the same food and resource, as whatever that pathogen is. So it's already kind of starting out behind the eight ball. Or two, and yes, in some certain cases, it's already got a predator already in the system that's just going to bite it, eat it up the second it encounters it. So it's one of the biggest strengths of a living soil environment is that, so many people who deal with other types of growing are so worried about, things coming into the system, but we have that on purpose. You know what I mean? In the living soil kind of methodology, because we're asking all of these organisms to actually do stuff for us. And one of those things they do is play defense for us. So any other thing that might come in there, it gets thrown in there. And if it's in a total sterile environment, just like some rock wool with nutrients, it's going to explode. But if there's other organisms and other biology in there that it has to compete with or can eat it, you're already kind of ahead of the game. The
Yeah.
second part
Yeah.
of the question, the cover crop. Um, my take on cover crops is it depends on indoor, outdoor. And for me, only have being an experienced indoor grower, we don't use them because we're worried about basically just adding another variable into a formula that it's already got a ton of variables. And so while there may be some benefits, particularly outdoor wise, I've found that the risks of having a cover crop on an indoor plant outweigh the rewards we may see for having one as well.
Yeah. 100%. The as far as removing pathogens, worms aren't going to remediate, a pathogen from your soil. Worms are going to make your soil breathe better and that kind of stuff, oxygenate your soil, and so it could improve the health of your soil, but it's not going to remediate a pathogen. I mean, I've got in this big old forehead, I've got Fusarium, Botrytis, PM. I'm sure of it if you swabbed it, and so we can't really exclude pathogens. So we want to outcompete them, like Ben said. So for pests, I like Bovaria in my soil, Bovaria bassiana, like Botaniguard WP. For pathogens, I'm a huge fan of trichoderma, so a product like Root Shield WP would be great. Cease, like Cease and Desist from Bioworks. Cease is Bacillus subtilis. It will help, and then Tad, I think, touched on it, but mustards are fumigates and will kill everything, meaning they have non-target organism effects. So they're going to wipe out everything. And so in general, like I'm 100% in agreement with Ben. I don't like cover crops indoors, but if you had a specific fungal pathogen that you needed to tackle, if you just lost half your harvest to Fusarium or Botrytis, doing mustard as a cover crop might be something you might want to try. Again, there's other things that we already know are effective. And
Hmm.
so, if you want to, like Ben said, if you can afford to crash a room to do an experiment, it's worth it. But, I would stick to traditional biology and environmental best practices before I planted mustard. And again, you could be self-defeating, so you bring in the mustard to be a fumigant and kill these, biologies we don't like. But then you're also creating this microclimate that makes us more, easier to spread and that kind of stuff. So outside, it would be a better thing to do, and I would only do it if I was targeting.
Hmm. All right, I got a couple more. We got a couple more minutes here. Hair is full of phosphorus, but supposedly a certain amount of heavy metal as well. Have you tried to use hair in your compost? Um, I think we can pretty much tell just based on what we got in front of us that Brandon has not.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, yeah, but I will
Me,
say
I'm losing it, but not to compost. Yeah.
when we my wife routinely shaves her head and keeps a clean dome these days, and my oldest son gets pretty regular haircuts. He likes to he's image focused and likes to stay a nice high and tight clean cut. I do put that into the compost, and
Yeah.
and hair is something that I'll throw in the compost, even if I just throw it on top. And really, the thought process is has changed where I used to think, okay, well, I'm getting some phosphorus, whatever, out of this hair. Uh, Tad's dad has really gotten me thinking about the fauna out here, and there's
Hmm.
birds that need that hair. There's birds that will, I've sat in the backyard and watched birds come pick up the
Yeah.
hair and take it back to their nest. So,
Yeah. All part of the system, man.
yeah, I would rather put everything into compost as long as, like PFOS, heavy metals, obviously we
Yeah.
want to include certain things, but animal parts, whatever, I like to close the loop wherever I can.
Cool. And then this one, it's bad to finger check a 15-gallon pot often.
Man, I'm all about a finger check, and I'm not scared to go in through the bottom either. Like, I think it's well, I think it's important, because like if you've got a 1 gallon pot, you could be totally dry up here. You poke the bottom and you're wet. So pot lifts are important. Getting to know what a totally dry plant, because you got the weight of the plant, the soil, and the pot.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some weight. Tad and I visited a farm. It's like 2 years ago now, but they were like, "Oh yeah, no, these plants, they don't need water. They're all heavy." And we're picking them up, and there was some weight, but there can also be water. There's water in a pot that's not available. It's so tightly held to the
Right.
substrate that it's just not available. And so, it's really really important. So, with organics, I love meters and all that kind of stuff, but you got to use your senses. Touch, maybe not taste some stuff maybe, but smell for sure. Looking at things. So yeah, I don't think that's a problem at all.
Awesome. Let's do this last question, you guys. What CFUs are you looking for in a product containing trichoderma, Brandon?
Man, we should have wrapped it up. I will have to look. I'll have to look that up. Maybe we can add that. I apologize. I don't have a CFU metric off the top of my head.
Cool.
Um,
Little homework. Let's do it.
I do. That's why I use the trichoderma, because that's coming from Chris Hayes and Michael Brownbridge. That's the Cornell Ag Department. That's BioWorks. It's pretty hard. Those two of the top pathologists on the planet. So if they tell me to do something the same way if Suzanne tells me to do something with bugs, I'm gonna do it. But yeah, and then little
Cool.
nugs, man, I would love to start the next one with this question. Any real difference between dry amendments and liquid carbon-based fertilizers? And yeah, I'll bring my fighting boots for that one. I can't. That's a
Cool.
great.
We'll hold
Thank you
that
guys.
one then. Yeah, this was
Yeah,
awesome, man.
Ben, thank you for being here today. Tad, thanks
Yeah,
for
of course.
coming in.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I
Great
think
questions, you guys. Thanks for joining too.
I think this next coming Tuesday, we'll be back to our regular programming with Tad and Chad Westport. And then, we'll continue to do these. We're still doing book club and end of the month
Yeah.
hanging over at KISS. And yeah, just thank you guys so much for coming. If we didn't get to your question, we'll get to it next time.
Yep.
And if we can, assist you with your grows, you know where to find us over at KISS Organics. Everybody have an awesome week.
Thanks, you guys. See you later.